Baker Mayfield and Justin Herbert's ADPs are falling like crazy in June. We'll explain why next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. You can also check me out over on the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Joining me today, as always, is Michael Fabiano. You can follow him on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. You can also check him out over on SI, where he does a bunch of fantastic fantasy and dynasty work. And on today's show, we're going to talk about some of the biggest dynasty losers in the month of June. Over on Dynasty League Football, we have this change in value app, which is really handy. It can show us which players have dropped the most in ADP. And Fabs, let's start with Justin Herbert, who is down to QB 10. There were a couple people in the month of May that were ranking him inside like the top 8 quarterbacks, right after Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes. Down to QB 10 behind Kyler Murray, Drake May, Caleb Williams. Does that feel right?
It's funny because when I look at my dynasty rankings over at Sports Illustrated, and those will be getting a refresher here in the next month or so, a lot of my ADPs are very in sync with what we're seeing on DLF after the update. So, for example, I have Justin Herbert basically right where he is right now on DLF at QB 10. Now, I have Bo Nix ahead of him. Herbert is ahead of Bo Nix based on that ADP data, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think the biggest thing, Marcus, that people have to remember is that Justin Herbert's time as an elite fantasy quarterback are over. He started his career by putting up massive numbers, but the change at the top in Jim Harbaugh, and of course, when you look at Greg Roman's offense, they're not super quarterback friendly unless you're a guy who can run with the ball, right? I mean, Lamar Jackson,
Which Herbert can run, but he's not like that. Yeah,
right, exactly. And also, this was interesting. Last year, the Chargers were 23rd in pass percentage. That's not surprising because Greg Roman is a guy who leans on the run. Something else that was not surprising, Herbert's 29.6 pass attempts per game last year were a career low. That's 5.5 fewer pass attempts than he averaged in 2023. And Greg Roman has been an offensive coordinator in the National Football League for multiple teams for a long time, and only one quarterback has averaged more than 30 pass attempts per game in his offense, as that was Lamar Jackson in 2021, and he barely was over that. So, listen, Herbert was respectable last year. He finished 11th in fantasy points, but I really think there's a cap on his ceiling. And especially now after the Chargers brought in Najee Harris as a free agent. Of course, they drafted Omarion Hampton in the first round. What does that signal to you? They're going to continue to run the football and maybe even run it a little bit more because now they have more assets in the backfield. J.K. Dobbins is gone, but Harris and Omarion Hampton are a massive upgrade. So I listen, Herbert's a young guy who's going to put up good numbers from time to time, but is he ever going to get back into that top 5 ballpark when it comes to fantasy quarterbacks? Not as long as Greg Roman is the OC.
Yeah, so his ADP in the month of May, 87 overall. Now it's 111. I mean, that's a 2-round drop in a startup draft. That's pretty significant. But if I was going to make the case for Justin Herbert, I would say, and he was beat up the first half of the season. He got hurt in that Carolina game. He tried to play in the Pittsburgh game. I think it was week 3 or week 4. He got hurt in the second half of that game. And he wasn't the same for the first, 8 weeks of the season. And I think once we saw him in the second half, he looked a little bit healthier. But I can't imagine a Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman offense not featuring the run, at least, a big portion. So maybe his passing attempts go up a little bit, but this is a team that wants to stay balanced and run the football.
Actions speak volumes, and the biggest moves they made on the offensive side we're signing Harris and drafting Hampton, 2 running backs. So again, Herbert's got a big arm. He's going to be a very good fantasy quarterback. He's not going to be elite anymore. Again, as long as he's in Roman's offense. I remember when Harbaugh came aboard in LA, and I'm thinking, he's going to bring Greg Roman with him. And then he ultimately did. And I think, well, this is going to hurt Justin Herbert. And again, 11th is respectable. That's good, but it's not high end. He's still a young guy, and who knows who his offensive coordinator is going to be into the future. My guess is that Harbaugh and Roman aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So for now, I think Justin Herbert is where he should be, and I understand the drop.
So I think he can finish higher than 11th. I think he can finish 7th or 8th or somewhere in that range. But the problem is, Fabs, you don't want to necessarily draft a quarterback at 9 or 10 that you think can finish 7th or 8th, right?
Yeah.
You want to kind of draft a guy that you think has a higher ceiling than that can be a guy that is the actual difference maker for your fantasy teams. And that's where I think, some of those other quarterbacks in that range, whether that's like a Bo Nix or Caleb Williams or Drake May, they just present more upside than what Justin Herbert does, even if Herbert has a much higher floor.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No question. And once again, there's no disagreement with myself and Marcus. The guy is super talented, and
he's awesome.
I mean, if Don Coryell was calling the plays, he'd probably be in the top 5, but that's not the case.
All right, let's talk about Baker Mayfield, who is the other quarterback that saw a massive drop in his ADP. 108 starting in May, 136 now here in the month of June. He is down all the way to QB 15. And it's interesting because they have Mike Evans. They brought back Chris Godwin. They have Jalen McMillan in year 2. They drafted Emeka Egbuka. They're going to throw the ball all over the field. Why is the ADP dropping now?
Do you think maybe that the high of Baker finishing as the QB4 last year and throwing for 41 touchdown passes is kind of worn out a little bit? Maybe a little bit. Listen, possible. Baker was fantastic last year. If you ended up drafting him late, and you may have gone to the championship or won it because of Baker Mayfield, he was just that good. As Cleveland Browns fans in the background crying and into their beer. But I think the thing with Baker, and I have Baker ahead of Jared Goff. Otherwise, I kind of agree with where he's at right now. There's younger quarterbacks, right? I mean, you could throw Jordan Love in there, Drake May, obviously, that you're probably going to want to keep or draft a little bit higher in Dynasty because of the age difference. So when you look at a 5-year age difference between, for example, Mayfield and Jordan Love, that's huge. And Jordan Love didn't have a great year last year, but again, I mean, he showed the year before that he could put up very good fantasy numbers, and things kind of went a little wacky with the Packers in terms of their offense last season. They leaned on Josh Jacobs a lot, but the good news is that Baker's got Mike Evans, he's got Chris Godwin, he's got Egbuka, Jalen McMillan, obviously Cade Otton. Also, Marcus, maybe people are a little bit wary of Mike Evans's age, although I wouldn't be, because he hasn't shown any signs of slowing down. And the fact that Godwin's coming back from a really gruesome ankle injury, that maybe Evans is going to take a step back and Godwin's going to take some time to get back, which means he's going to have Egbuka, who's a rookie, and McMillan maybe in more prominent roles. I don't know that necessarily would keep me from drafting Baker Mayfield, but maybe that also is part of it, because Baker showed no signs of a quarterback who's going to start a decline anytime soon, even though he's already 30 years old. Some of these quarterbacks in the league, they play until their mid-30s and later than that, and they do pretty well.
I think it's also just the mentality of some of these drafters, right? If you were drafting in February, March, you see a 2 to start in Baker Mayfield's age. And now that he turned 30 in April, for whatever reason, Dynasty managers get scared off once they see that 3 hit their screen. But I think another thing we should mention is this is the 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 seasons, right? Dave Canales goes to Carolina, Liam now in Jacksonville. I think it's Josh Grizzard as the OC now. Not that I'm overly concerned, but that is a lot of change to happen in 3 years. I think he's going to be fine, but he doesn't really give you rushing upside. And if he has a regression at all in the touchdowns, and even if it goes from, let's say, 41 to 32, which would still be a really good season, now you're dropping from quarterback 4 to quarterback 8, quarterback 9. I wonder if people would just feel like, hey, he's a high-end QB2, but let's cool it a little bit with the QB1 talks in Dynasty.
Yeah, and his ceiling was probably reached last year. Let's be honest here. As great as he was, and he was fantastic, will Baker ever have another season like that again? Chances are probably not that good.
All right, let's talk about Tyler Warren, who has seen his ADP drop more than any other player in fantasy football. We'll try to explain why next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every single game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I'm already starting to dive into some of the NFL futures. Week 1 lines are out. You can go bet on the MVPs. You can bet on who's going to win Defensive Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year. It's all available on FanDuel, and that's the perfect time to sign up. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Fabs, let's talk about Tyler Warren, who has seen a major decrease in his dynasty value. 59th overall going into May, 76 now on Dynasty League football. At one point, he was the tight end 4 behind Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and Sam Laporta. Now he's all the way down to tight end 7, and Colston Loveland has jumped him. TJ Hawkinson has jumped him. And the gap between Tyler Warren and Mark Andrews is actually starting to close. What's going on here?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I can see Loveland jumping him because he's got a couple of years on him, 21 to 23. But I'm a fan of Tyler Warren. And I think there's been a lot of fantasy analysts out there, Marcus, that have been kind of down on where he landed, which I don't really understand so much either. This is a kid who not only made an impact last year as a pass catcher with 104 catches and 8 touchdowns, over 1,200 yards, he also ran for 218 yards and scored 4 touchdowns. He made up 31% of Penn State's total team targets last season. And when you look at his PFF grades, I mean, he finished second only behind Harold Fannin Jr., who went nuts. You want to look at a tight end with a huge season in college, go look at the numbers that Harold Fannin put in. He was second in yards after contact, Warren was. He was third in yards per route run. He was 8th in contested catches. He was tied for 3rd in missed tackles forced after reception. His average depth of target was 6.3. I like him. I mean, listen, I see Dallas Clark. Okay, I mean, maybe that's just me because, I'm old school. I see Dallas Clark in this kid. And Dallas Clark was a damn good fantasy tight end. Now he did have Peyton Manning. Obviously, that's a huge, advantage for him to have. But I mean, the Colts, they have Michael Pittman Jr. took a step back last year. We hope that he bounces back. Josh Downs has showed some flashes, but he had some injury issues. The quarterback situation. I mean, right now, if you're reading reports, it looks like Daniel Jones is the favorite to be their week 1 starter. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for any of their pass catchers. So I'm a little confused. I mean, why would you want, for example, George Kittle, who's 31 years old, ahead of Tyler Warren in a dynasty league? I don't understand the reasoning behind that.
Well, I wonder if it's as simple as the quarterback play is just too in flux, right? Again, we like history here. If you go back and look at the top, let's say 50 fantasy seasons all time by tight ends, one thing you're going to notice is that the quarterbacks throwing them the ball are really good. Rob Gronkowski, I think, has the best fantasy season ever, 2011. That's with Tom Brady. Jimmy Graham with Drew Brees. Travis Kelce with Patrick Mahomes. Even someone like Zach Ertz had a pretty decent quarterback with Carson Wentz, who was in MVP conversations. You mentioned Dallas Clark. I just wonder, Antonio Gates is another one. Jason Witten. The names are just rattling off my brain right now. I just wonder if dynasty drafters are like, we like Tyler Warren, but let's cool it a little bit until we figure out who's going to be throwing him the football for the next 5 or so years.
I can understand that, but I mean, in the case of George Kittle, look at the data. When a tight end gets to like 32, Like that's when the numbers start to drop off. And
but do you think do you think Travis Kelce playing as well as has over the last couple of years has made people ignore that a little bit?
No, because I mean he's still an outlier. He's still he's an outlier. Tony Gonzalez was an outlier.
But maybe they just think George Kittle's an outlier because he's of that caliber of player.
Do you think that Kittle's on the same level as Kelce and Gonzalez? I mean, I'm not sure about that.
Well, I don't know. Think as players, yes, because he's a good blocker, but as pure receivers, it's a good question. You know what I mean?
Yeah, see, I wouldn't be surprised if Kittle took a step back even this season because he had a great 2024. And I look at that kind of thing. If you want to take Hawkinson over him, Hawkinson's what, 28? Okay, I kind of get that, but I like Tyler Warren. I love what I saw from him at Penn State. He's a versatile type of guy who's not going to come off the field. And even if the Colts, think about it, if the Colts decide to go in a different direction, say in 2026, right? Say Richardson, we're not going to, Daniel Jones is not a long-term type of guy. A tight end can ultimately and sometimes be a young quarterback's best friend as that security blanket and safety valve. And maybe Tyler Warren becomes that. I have him as the tight end 4 where he was previously on DLF, and I ain't going to move him. I mean, if you want to go with Colston Loveland ahead of him because of the 2-year age gap, okay, I understand that. If you think Loveland's going to be the next Sam Laporta, okay, I understand that. But I'm a fan of Tyler Warren. There was nothing that I saw or read with him coming out of college that signaled to me, red flag, you don't want to take this guy in dynasty startups. No chance.
I don't think honestly, I don't think it has anything to do with Tyler Warren himself. I think it's all situation because not only do they not have a good quarterback situation, but the receivers are actually pretty good. I think we like the receivers between Michael Pittman. I know there's a lot of people that like Josh Downs. Alec Pierce was pretty effective last year as a downfield receiver. And then they drafted AD Mitchell in round 2 last year. And Chris Ballard's on record saying, I think he thought AD Mitchell was the 3rd or 4th best receiver in the class. So maybe there's just an argument that there's going to be so many mouths to feed on top of Jonathan Taylor getting all of his work. But again, if you're drafting a tight end, you're like early in your startups or early in your rookie drafts, you've got to think long-term anyways. And probably by the time Tyler Warren is, 25, 26 years old, none of these guys are going to be here. So I wouldn't stress about it too much.
And I also wonder too, that when people are starting up dynasty leagues, are they really 100% focused on the task at hand? Because it seems odd that I would draft Tyler Warren over George Kittle or TJ Hawkinson, for example, but you have to think long-term. You can't think seasonally. You've got to think long-term. And this is a young guy, 23 years old, coming out of college. Now, I don't think he's going to be Sam Laporta. I don't think he's going to be Brock Bowers, okay? But is there a world where Tyler Warren can finish in the top 12 among tight ends this season as a rookie? 100%. Yeah. And then, you build on that into the future.
I understand ranking Kittle ahead of Tyler Warren. I don't understand them being drafted 2 rounds apart from one another. Like that's where I can't wrap my brain around it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make
again, I'm looking at the age, man, and I'm seeing maybe 1 or 2 more good years from Kittle based on, historical data that we have. And maybe he will end up being like a Gonzalez or Kelce. I don't know that I agree with that though.
All right, let's talk about AJ Brown because he's the one receiver that saw a big decrease in his ADP over the last month. We'll tell you why next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Fabs, let's talk about AJ Brown because I find this one fascinating. So his overall ADP has dropped from 18 to 21. Now, that doesn't sound like a big drop. You're only talking about a couple spots. Mm-hmm. But in terms of where he's being drafted among receivers, it's pretty significant. At one point this offseason, he was a top 8 dynasty wide receiver. Now he's all the way down to wide receiver 14 behind Ladd McConkey, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson. And I find this fascinating because it's not like A.J. Brown is 29 or 30 years old. He's 27. He is in the prime of his career. Pro Football Focus just ranked him as the #1 receiver in the entire league. I disagree with that a little bit. I think Chase and Jefferson are better, but you get the point. Like, he's in that tier of elite receivers. Why is he being drafted so low all of a sudden?
What's funny, Marcus, is that I actually have him ranked exactly where he is right now on DLF. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think Brown does turn 28 in September.
You might be right. That's just his current age. Is
yeah, right. So no, I like him, but the guys you mentioned,
I turned 28 in June.
Okay, so I definitely am a fan. I like where I have him and where DLF has him right now, behind Garrett Wilson, behind Jackson Smith and Jigba, MHJ, Laddie Daddy. But I also have Rashee Rice ahead of him too, because Rashee Rice is a younger guy, and I, like you, think he's going to end up being very good. Brown has seen his points per game average drop in 3 straight years, but it's been very minimal, right? He was at 17.6 in 22, 17 points per game in 23, 16.7 last year. So he's not seeing like some significant fall off the table kind of drop, but I kind of think that he's where he should be. And at that point, I think a lot of it is just personal preference. Like, for example, I love Ladd McConkey. I'm a big fan of him. I have durability issues with him. I'm a little bit concerned about that. So some people may think that and be like, all right, well, AJ Brown, 28 years old. I get it. There's an age difference, but he's been mostly durable in the NFL. I'd rather take a guy like him, and he's more of an alpha, where, Ladd McConkey, I wouldn't call him an alpha in the NFL. Although, we've seen slot receivers who've been, very, very good. McConkey can actually play on the perimeter as well. So I can kind of see that, but I'm not in disagreement with the drop, because that's kind of where I had him regardless. And, another thing to keep in mind, and some people may not like to hear this, but if Saquon Barkley does experience a regression, which, folks, he is going to, and it's guaranteed, if he misses time, what happens to that offense? So they have to throw the football a little bit more. I don't think A.J. Brown takes a step back statistically. In fact, I think, based on Barkley potentially being a player who regresses, who maybe misses time because he had 1 million touches last season. Okay, that's a little bit of an embellishment, but you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Maybe they have to throw the ball to A.J. Brown a little bit more in 2025. Remember, what happened last season was last season. The magical season of Saquon Barkley was last season, and every single trend and curse and hex and jinx and everything is going against him. If you want to learn more about that, check out Sports Illustrated, because I have a whole bunch of content on that. And I'm not just spitting out just crap just to be controversial. It's legitimately the historical facts.
We also did a show on it last week. Go check that show out as well.
Of running backs who have 2,000 plus yards rushing, of running backs who have over 400 carries in a single season between the regular season and the playoffs, of running backs who have 370 touches, or guys who are on the Madden cover. So, if that happens and Barkley misses any kind of time, A.J. Brown's going to be maybe not far more prominent, but even more prominent in that offense.
I like A.J. Brown quite a bit because he's been so consistent, not only just with the Eagles, but with the Titans as well. I mean, over the last 3 years with Philadelphia, he's averaging 85 receiving yards per game. You're going to have a hard time finding the number of receivers that can average 85 yards per game that can score the touchdowns that he can. Now, if you're in a PPR league, like a full point PPR league, maybe you downgrade him a little bit because he just doesn't get the same number of targets. But man, I still think he is incredibly valuable in this offense. And we should mention, he missed time earlier in the season that I think affected him in the middle portion of the year. And then we saw him as the year went on. He got healthier and healthier and became, absolutely dominant, especially in the playoffs. I guess I look at someone like Marvin Harrison Jr., and I understand the age. You're getting 5-6 years younger. But we're hoping that Marvin Harrison Jr. becomes the kind of ex-alpha receiver that A.J. Brown is. If I told you, Marvin Harrison Jr. averaged 72 yards per game this year, we would be thrilled with that, right? We would be so happy. The fact that A.J. Brown has been doing it for this long, and he's in a really good offense, I maybe I'm not moving him up, but I see him as just such a good value at that spot.
Yeah, I probably disagreed with where he was. I agree with where he is now on DLF, and I don't know that he's going to move anymore. He's not. I don't think he'll drop let's put it that way. I also don't think he's going to move back up to where he was at 18.3.
Well, and this is going to be my last point before we go. If you're in a startup draft that, over the next 2 months or so, and you can get an early pick, you can pick at, 2, 3, 4. That's a great spot to be in, because in the second round, the back end of the second round, you should be able to get a player like AJ Brown. So if you want to start your drafts with, Justin Jefferson and AJ Brown, get 2 20, mid 20-year-old receivers. Fab, that's a heck of a way to start a draft.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And, in this day and age when wide receivers are just so valuable, getting AJ Brown as a wide receiver 2, that feels pretty good to me.
Yeah. All right. That is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, it's a Matt Williamson Wednesday show. We'll be answering your Twitter questions, so make sure you guys are tuning in for that. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Fabs on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.